In the year 563 BC, in the town of Lumbini, near the border between modern-day Nepal and India, a son was born to a minor noble family called Gautama. Sadly, his mother died whilst giving birth to him. His father named him Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. Siddhartha Gautama was born. It was prophesied that he would either become a great king or a great religious leader. His father, mindful of this prophecy and wanting his son to take over after him, shielded him from all religious teaching and raised him in a life of absolute luxury. He was raised in beautiful palaces surrounded by beautiful women. Only those who were healthy and attractive were allowed to see him, and his every whim was catered to. He never saw the sick, the elderly, or the dead. At the age of 16, as was the custom, he married his cousin, the beautiful Yasodhara, and soon after they had a son. And yet something was missing for the young prince. He found himself unsatisfied and curious about the outside world. And so, at the age of 29, he asked his charioteer and good friend Channa to take him outside the walls of his palace. There, for the first time, he saw an elderly person, bent double with age and arthritis. Channa explained to him that everyone will one day become old. Next, he encountered a sick person for the first time. Channa explained to him that everyone will become sick from time to time. He then encountered a corpse for the first time. Channa explained that we all must die one day. Siddhartha Gautama was greatly disturbed by these truths and found himself troubled and in distress. Finally, before returning to the palace, Siddhartha and Channa encountered an ascetic monk peacefully meditating. Channa explained that monks such as this had renounced worldly pleasures in order to pursue enlightenment and an end to suffering. After returning to his palace, Siddhartha found himself unable to enjoy the life he had previously lived. His thoughts returned constantly to the realities of suffering and death he had encountered. And so, a short time later, he secretly left his palace in the middle of the night, leaving behind his wife and young son. He had started his quest for enlightenment. He had started the journey that would make him the first Buddha, founder of the major world religion we still have today. Having renounced his princely life, full of luxury and privilege, one of his first acts was to shave his head and don the simple robes of an ascetic monk. He then studied meditation with two well-known religious teachers. However, he felt dissatisfied with their teachings, and so he soon struck out on his own, using what he had learned whilst practicing extreme asceticism. For 6 long years he practiced asceticism, depriving his body of food and water whilst living under the meanest conditions. He soon came close to the point of death. However, he was saved from death by a young girl who nursed him back to health by giving him rice pudding. He then discovered what is now known as the middle way, that neither extreme luxury nor extreme deprivation is the key to enlightenment. Siddhartha then sat beneath a pipal tree and meditated for several days. At the end of this time, finally, at the age of 35, he achieved enlightenment, otherwise called moksha. He remembered his past lives and understood how to permanently avoid suffering and pain. He had become the Buddha, the enlightened one, the awakened one. The tree was renamed the Bodhi tree to honor this occasion, and it can still be seen today. The Buddha spent the remainder of his life traveling around India and Nepal, teaching the path to enlightenment and the cessation of suffering. He did eventually return to his wife and his son, who eventually became one of his most ardent followers. Today, over 500 million people from all corners of the globe still follow the Buddha's teachings, and his footprint on history will never fade. So what did the Buddha realize under that pipal tree all those years ago? This is the Philosopher's Cave, and this is our series on Eastern philosophy. I teach suffering, its origin, cessation, and path. That's all I teach, the Buddha. That, in a nutshell, is the essence of Buddhism. In a little more detail, Buddhism can be summarized in the 4 noble truths. First, the truth of suffering. Second, the truth of the origin of suffering. Third, the truth of the cessation of suffering. And fourth, the way leading to the cessation of suffering, otherwise known as the Noble Eightfold Path. And we'll go through each of them in turn, breaking them down. So the first noble truth. According to the Buddha, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are suffering. Not to obtain what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates affected by clinging are suffering. This is called suffering. We'll come on to the five aggregates later, but ultimately life itself is full of suffering. And the problem gets worse. Buddhists believe in rebirth. We are stuck in a cycle of samsara in which we are born, we die, and then we are reborn to repeat the whole process all over again. So it doesn't end at death. On to the second noble truth. According to the Buddha, what is the origin of suffering? It is craving, which brings renewal of being, is accompanied by delight and lust, and delight in this and that is craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being and craving for non-being. This is called the origin of suffering. So ultimately, clinging and craving are the causes of suffering. And it's also this which causes us to be endlessly reborn in the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death and rebirth. And we'll examine this in more detail later, so we'll come back to this. On to the third noble truth. According to the Buddha, and what is the cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go and rejecting of that same craving. This is called the cessation of suffering. So ultimately it is possible to avoid suffering through letting go and ceasing to be. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by following the fourth noble truth. The fourth noble truth is that the way to let go and escape suffering is by following the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is an ethical guide to the entirety of our lives. The Eightfold Path is right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The point is that we have to do the right thing, think the right things, and meditate in the right way. So the Eightfold Path encompasses all aspects of our lives. So what happens when we achieve the goal of the Eightfold Path? Well, we achieve Nirvana. The literal meaning of Nirvana is blowing out or quenching. Nirvana is an end to suffering and to the cycle of rebirth, otherwise known as samsara. And to understand how this works, we're going to need to examine the Buddhist account of personal identity. So Buddhists subscribe to a bundle theory of the self. A bundle theory of personhood says that all we are is a bundle of properties and relations, but that there is no I having those properties or relations. There are just the properties and relations. So according to Buddhism, humans are made of five aggregates. And these are form, sensation, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. It should be noted that the five aggregates are constantly undergoing change as our experiences change. One sensation changes into another sensation, for example. They, like everything else, are impermanent and subject to change. So the details of the five aggregates don't matter. Ultimately, the most important idea is that we are composed of the five aggregates, and that there's nothing to us above and beyond the five aggregates. As such, all there is to us is a bundle of ever-changing parts, but there's nothing having those parts. There is no I above and beyond, for example, the hand, the eye, the thought, and so on, which so happen to be in the same place at the same time. As such, there is no unchanging, permanent self, soul, or essence above and beyond our constituent parts. Thus, in some sense, we don't really exist, at least not in the way we might think we do. And this, in a nutshell, is the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, or no self. At the same time, in some sense, we exist, obviously, otherwise who's watching this video? But in another sense, we don't exist, at least not in the way we might instinctively view ourselves as existing. So we both do and don't exist at the same time. The question now becomes, inasmuch as we do exist, what is it that constitutes our identity over time? Well, it's simply the causal chain which exists between the 5 constantly clinging aggregates. Each of the aggregates clings together, forming a bundle. And as each aggregate changes from one form to the other, a chain is established. Thus there's a causal chain which links you yesterday to you today. What you did yesterday affects you today in a particularly intimate way. Likewise, you as a baby are linked to you now and to you as an old person. However, in another sense, you aren't the same person as you were yesterday, or as a baby, because you've changed since then. And alongside this causal chain, there exists a karmic chain, with good actions resulting in good consequences for the person performing the action, and bad actions resulting in bad consequences for the person performing the action. This chain doesn't end at our physical death, because the aggregates continue to cling together and are united to another body, and thus in some sense we continue to exist in another life and in another body. We can end this endless cycle, the cycle of suffering, death, and rebirth. We can end this endless cycle by understanding the 4 noble truths and following the noble Eightfold path. This will stop us from clinging and will allow the aggregates to simply drift apart, or something to this effect. So I'll include a link to my philosophical colleague, Dr. Chidi Anagonye, who explains it well. Perhaps check that out after this video. So this drifting apart, this blowing out, quenching, remainderless fading away, back into ultimate reality, free from suffering and pain, is called Nirvana. And this is the goal of human existence. The good news is that we are not alone in this mission. The Buddha, in his enlightened state, has chosen not to completely dissolve back into ultimate reality. Instead, he continues to exist in some form or other, helping us to achieve enlightenment. Likewise, Buddhist monks and nuns, Buddhists in your local community, and the body of Buddhist believers generally, the Sangha, which means community, are there to help you in this quest. So you're not alone. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next episode in our series on the wisdom of the East. Take care. Goodbye.